The gospel lesson for this morning is from St. Luke's Gospel, the 17th chapter, beginning at the 11th verse. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. And then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. And then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" And then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Here ends the lesson. You can remain seated as we sing the song, "My Shepherd Will Supply My Need." Nancy picked this hymn, "My Shepherd Will Supply My Need," and many years ago when I was at a particularly bad time in my own life, we sang this hymn, and I quite honestly don't remember the occasion of the worship service. I was in the congregation, not the preacher. And that last phrase, "but like a child at home," was so comforting to me in that time. And I think that many of us, when we clear all the other junk away in our lives, one of the things that we're searching for is being like a child at home. Now, I know not all of you had a happy childhood, but you knew what a happy childhood should be, and you knew what a home and a house should be like. And I think that's an image that all of us have lived with. This is a story that's told by Paul Gorman and Ram Dass. We have a friend, a chemotherapy nurse in a children's cancer ward, whose job it is to pry for any available vein in an often emaciated arm to give infusions of chemicals that sometimes last as long as 12 hours and which are quite discomforting to the child. This nurse, he is probably the greatest pain giver the children meet in their stay in the hospital. Because he has worked so much with his own pain, his heart is very open. He works with his responsibilities in the hospital as a laying on of hands with love and acceptance. There is little in him that causes him to withdraw, that reinforces the painfulness of the experience for the children. He is a warm, open space which encourages them to trust whatever they feel. And it is he whom the children most often ask for at the time they are dying. Although he is the main pain giver, he is also the main love giver. Very sad scene. You and I can picture it. Maybe sometimes you've even experienced this yourself in various ways. And I wonder how many times those kids asked, "Why am I so sick? Why is this happening to me? What's going to be happening in the future? Am I going to die?" How do we answer questions like that? I remember doing a clinical unit while I was in seminary in the hospital in Maine, Eastern Maine Medical Center, and having questions like that asked of me, and I realized that this ministry was going to be serious business beyond what I had known. I had never experienced very many people dying, and those that I had experienced in my ministry before seminary were very old people. And as a young person, you know, it's easy to say, well, they're old. They die. But seeing children like this would be a whole different thing. Emergency situations and teenagers. The first time I was called to the emergency room, a teenager had just died. And then there were questions, and I didn't have any answers to those questions, and I thought that someday I would have those answers. And I asked a lot of people, what do you say about this? I asked my professors, of course, all the time, what do you say? And they never gave me any answers either. Because there are no satisfactory answers for so much pain. There are no satisfactory answers as to why these kids were separated from their childhood. And there's nothing more sad. There's nothing to say. So I think if you frame your thinking in the terms of the story I just told you, then you get a better grip on what it means to, in those days, to have been a leper. We don't even think about that anymore. The biblical story is probably the only contact we have with this idea of leprosy, and we understand it so much better nowadays. But I'll bet those lepers had the same kind of questions. Why did this happen to me? Why am I the one to suffer? Why am I so sick? Why am I taken from my family? And you know, when you picture the lepers, I'll bet you're picturing adult people walking around, but there were children too. There were little kids with those awful sores on them walking around, separated from everyone. In fact, the children may have been separated from their own parents. I don't think leprosy necessarily came to a family as a whole so they could stick together. So these children were with some other people, hoping that they would be cared for. And there was physical pain too, of course, but the emotional pain and the spiritual pain, I think, would be much greater because they were separated from everyone. They had this social separation, as you notice, when they came to Jesus. Even the 10 lepers then, they stayed at a distance. And as they walked through the streets, if you've ever seen one of the great religious movies where the lepers are portrayed, they'd walk down the street saying, unclean, unclean, so folks could get out of the way. They needed charity to live, so they had to live in areas where there were population because they hoped that the people would be charitable and there would be enough waste from ordinary people that some of it could fall to them. But they had to stay separate at a distance from well people. Their personhood was taken away. If you've spent any time with a person who's ministering to someone who's very sick, and they live in that world of sickness and pain and medication and doctor visits and hospital calls and all those things, it starts to change us. It starts to tear at our personality because that's what we see. My brother-in-law had Hodgkin's disease and died when he was 44, and for years and years that was the scene. He was depleted by radiation and chemo and all those things. And when we walked into their house, when we would go back to Illinois and visit, my kids, especially when they were smaller, they would all come close to me. Some of them would hold on to me. We were just going in the front door, but it was different. It was a different place to go. It was a different feeling about life. There were different possibilities. There was strangeness and fear about what was going on there. And my sister took that on to a great degree. And after her husband died, her life generally was not very happy. And she lived in that idea of sickness and pain and being separate, and almost with the feeling that she too was unclean because of that illness. The children in the hospital weren't available for a regular life. You know the life that we love with children? Not always when we're parents, but usually we love this life of laughing and hoping and running around and bouncing off things and trying things out and picking up things they shouldn't pick up and saying, "What's that?" And you say, "It's a priceless vase. Don't even touch it. Get away from it. Don't even look at it." And then, of course, as soon as you're out of the room, "Ooh, look at this. This looks great." It's the way it's supposed to be, isn't it? And they break things, and you say to yourself, I remember when my kids were little and broke a lot of things, I would say, well, I guess I was hoping to hold on to that for a long time, but the real gift in the room was the child, not the piece of pottery or the lamp.